Will Smith is famous for saying, parents just don't understand. And teachers all over the world are famous for saying, students just don't follow directions. Listen, if you're hearing this, you are not alone. So many teachers go through the same thing. But what if I told you that if we just spent the next couple of minutes together, I could show you how to make sure that students actually pay attention in your class without you doing much more than you actually are? See, the secret is to watch this episode of the New Teacher Big Impact podcast, where I'm your host, Daryl Williams Jr., and I help new teachers become the teachers they've always wanted to be and make the impact that they've always wanted to make. We're kicking off season 2. Super excited. If you've been here from the beginning, I just commend you, I affirm you, I celebrate you, and I appreciate you for sticking around with us. What better way to kick off season 2 than to do something that we've never done before? So, what I'm actually about to do is record a lesson for a virtual summit that is coming up. Somebody asked me to do a session on classroom management, and of course I accepted. I always want to impact however I can. And as I sat down to record, I said, wouldn't it be awesome if I let the podcast community get a behind the scenes look at it? So you guys ask me questions all the time about classroom management. So anytime I think something about classroom management, I think of you first. So I said, let me see how I can give access to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the entire lesson that I'm giving, but literally recording it at the same time. And I'm just going to chop off these first 2 minutes, and I'm going to submit the rest of it to the conference. So these first 2 minutes are just between me and the podcast listeners. I'm gonna cut that off and then send the rest of the training directly to the conference. Okay, so you guys are getting the first behind the scenes look. Super excited. And again, the goal is to make sure that you understand how to get students to listen. That is the goal and the objective of the next 20 minutes that we spend together. So let's make this thing happen. If you're watching online, you're actually going to be able to see the slides and everything like that. Actually, let me make sure I got that ready. And if you are listening, I'll just be very descriptive to make sure that you hear everything that you need to hear. Okay. All right. Make sure my clicker is working and we are solid, ready, and good to go. I might give them the same hook, so don't get mad at me. All right. Here we go. Will Smith made the phrase parents just don't understand super famous, right? But teachers all over the world made the phrase students just don't listen famous. Right? Listen, if you're saying any of these things, I promise you're not alone. So many teachers across the globe are wondering to themselves, why is it that students don't listen? I'm giving the directions, I'm laying out the procedures, I'm doing the things that I think I'm supposed to do, but students just don't listen. And the hard part is that I know how hard you work on your lessons. I know how hard you work to make sure that you can actually improve student achievement data. I know how hard you work to make sure that you show up for students, you provide materials, you make sure that you do the best for your students. I know how hard you work, and I know how frustrating it is when you then get into the class and students are not listening and not following directions. Because we know that if they're not listening and not following directions, they're not going to achieve their full potential like we set out to hope that they actually would. So you can't actually improve student achievement data if you can't manage the class, right? You can't actually help every single student grow if you can't manage the class. You can't actually fulfill your dream of immense impact if you can't manage the class. So as big as your dreams are, as big as your goals are, as the big as the impact that you want to make, the most important thing that you have to do as you step into a new year is understand how to manage the class. You're getting it, right? So in this lesson, you're going to learn how to make sure that we are managing the class so that we can deliver powerful lessons, we can empower students, we can provide transformation, and we can help students realize their full potential and ultimately their best selves. And it all starts with managing the class. All right. We're going to talk about how to make sure that we get students to listen without doing anything much more different than you actually are. And honestly, it's all rooted in communication. When you become a better communicator, you become a better classroom manager. And I'll prove it to you right here, right now. This story that I heard was from my assistant principal my first year teaching, and she told me about a teacher that she had, and the story always stuck with me. And I know that you're about to get it as well. She told the story of a young boy, a true story, that was in her teacher's class, and they were writing an essay. Everybody was single, silent, solo. They were just independent work, working on the essay. And the student finished his essay. He came up to the teacher's desk silently, put the paper on the desk. The teacher read over it. And as she read through it, she realized it was missing a lot of details. It wasn't really hitting the point. So she wrote the word vague at the top of his paper and handed it back to him and told him to go fix it. He took the paper, he went and he sat down. And then he started erasing some things. He started making some adjustments. Everybody's still working. A couple minutes later, he came back to the teacher's desk with the paper. He handed it to her and she looked at it and she read over it and she noticed that some things had changed, but not a lot. Like he added some commas here, he added some periods there, he changed the spelling of some words, but it still didn't have a lot of detail. So then she highlighted the word vague again. And then he went back to his room, his desk. He sat down. He's working on it. He's working on it. He's erasing. He's getting frustrated. You can see his head in his hands, and he's frustrated. And he brings it back to the teacher, and she reads over it. And listen, y'all, it's the same as it was the last time. Then she circles the word vague, hands it back to him, and says, "Go fix it." He goes to sit down. This time he doesn't even work on it. He puts the pencil down. He puts his head down on his desk. So now the teacher's concerned. So she gets up from her desk, walks over to him, puts her hand on the shoulder and said, "What's the problem? I'm telling you I'm not saying you failed. I'm not saying it's not a good grade. All I'm saying is you got to fix this." And then he looked up with tears in his eyes and he said, "I'm trying. I just don't know what Vagu means. I'm trying. I just don't know what Vagu means." Listen, when I say communication is key, what I'm saying is in order for us to get the thoughts that are in our head into the understanding of another person, we do that through communication. And although sometimes we're saying students are not listening, what the reality might be is not we are not effectively communicating. And I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I think we need to be truthful and honest with ourselves when we say one of the reasons why students are not listening, or one of the reasons why students won't follow directions is because the directions that we are giving are not as clear as they can be. I'll give you an example later of a non-example as well as a corrected example. But if we can be honest with ourselves, sometimes it's that we are giving students information, and although we understand it fluently in our minds, as we're communicating it to students, it's not landing, it's not reaching them, and they don't have 100% comprehension of the task that we're asking them to do. So now instead of them doing the thing that we told them to do, they do the thing that they desired to do. And oftentimes those things are not aligned. So the reason why we're not able to effectively manage the classroom is because we're not effectively communicating what needs to happen. So that's why this lesson, I'm going to give you a framework of communication that when you master this framework of communication with directions, I guarantee you the majority of the class will follow the directions the first time. All right, stick with me. It's called the frame framework. It's called the frame framework. But before we even dive into the frame framework of making sure that students can that you are effectively communicating, students can't actually listen to directions if they can't hear them. And students can't hear the directions if everybody is talking. So before we even dive into the frame framework, we need to make sure that we get the class quiet. And the way that we do that is through an attention grabbing signal. We're going to use an attention grabbing signal to make sure that students are getting quiet. And this is the first thing for those that are taking notes. This is the first thing you want to write down. And essentially what an attention grabbing signal is it's turning the students' voices off before you turn yours on. We've all been in situations where we try to talk to somebody and they're not paying attention, and you can tell that they're not paying attention. And imagine if it was a spouse, a loved one, somebody that you were talking to that you really wanted to get some information to, and you're trying to speak to them and they're looking at something else, or their head is down in their phones, or they're looking up in the sky. You would then say, "You're not paying attention." But sometimes when we're in the classroom, we start talking and students are looking off to the side, or their heads are on the phone, or having small talk at their tables. They're looking around. And although they're not paying attention, we proceed with giving directions. And as we proceed with giving directions, and then we expect them to go do the thing. And when they can't do it, we say, "Oh, these students just don't follow directions." They don't know what the directions were because they were not put in a position to be successful. Because before you give directions, you need to make sure you have their attention. So you turn students' voices off before you turn yours on, to make sure that you have the complete control and focus and attention of the room. So I always like to share principles to make sure that you understand the principle of the matter. The principle of the matter is their voice needs to go off. Now, how? There are three different ways that we can use attention grabbing signals. The first version of an attention grabbing signal is something that is visual. A visual attention grabbing signal is something that is seen by the students. It's a teacher action that is seen by the students, and they know that this signifies it's time for us to get silent and pay attention. This could be turning off the lights. This could be the teacher just standing in the front of the classroom, right? This could be a color on the board. Like it could be so many different things. Those are all different strategies, but you know me, I'm always going to teach principle. The principle is if you're using a visual cue, it's just something that students can see. And when they see it, they need to understand, boom, this means that we need to get silent and pay attention. Right? My first year principal, he used to stand, no matter where he was, he would just stand and raise his hand. And when he raised his hand, everybody else would raise their hand, whether he was in the classroom with 32 people, or if it was in the cafeteria with 160 people, or if it was in the gym with 600 students. He would just stand and raise his hand, and everybody else would raise their hand and get silent. Not saying you have to do that. I'm saying that is an example of a visual attention grabbing signal. But visual attention grabbing signals are not the only way. You can also use an auditory attention grabbing signal. An auditory attention grabbing signal is something that students obviously hear. I'm not going to insult your intelligence. You guys are brilliant. So you know that auditory means they hear. So that could be when we're clapping, right? Or a call and response. When I say get, you say ready, get ready, right? It's something that students are hearing. And when they hear it, they know to fall in line. The other example is going to be, the other principle is going to be use a digital signal. There's so many digital softwares now that we can use that when you utilize technology to signify that it's time for us to get silent. So it could be a graphic that appears on the screen. Now, when they see this graphic, it needs to get silent. It could be like a Bluetooth doorbell. Like when you can buy those from Amazon, and if you press the doorbell button and you have the chime in your classroom, when students hear this sound, that they will then get silent, right? That's also auditory, obviously, but it's using technology, so we can consider it to be digital. Again, there's so many different strategies and so many different ways. I'm sharing some of them because I want you to be able to start thinking in your mind about some of the things that you can do, but it's going to fall into one of these three categories. Either how are you going to get students silent? How are you going to grab students' attention? Because before you start spewing out directions, we need to make sure we have their attention. And it's going to be one of these three things. Essentially, you want to make sure that here's the definition if you want to write it down. It is an action that is performed by the teacher that signifies to students that they need to get silent and pay attention. And that has to happen before you try to give directions. If you don't do this, there is a high probability that whatever you're about to say next does not matter, right? Like whatever you're about to say next, most of the students are not going to hear. Not only the students that are not paying attention, but oftentimes they'll be distracting students that are trying to pay attention. So you may have 70% of the class that can't even hear the directions because you did not use an attention grabbing signal. So before we even dive into the framework, I needed to start with that because I need you to see how important it is to have an attention grabbing signal. And for anybody who's like, oh, I tried that before, my students won't do it. I tried that before, it doesn't work in my class. I tried that before. I'm going to push back. I'm going to transition to coach mode in a second. And I'm going to say that at that point, it's not on the students, because it is the teacher's responsibility to make sure that the attention grabbing signal is done consistently and that students understand that whenever this happens, the expectation is that we get silent. You can incentivize them, you can consequence them, you can reward them, you can take things away. You have to associate something to it, but they need to know that when it happens, we need to get silent. And the way that we do that is through practice. We're not just going to practice until they get it right. We're going to practice until they can't get it wrong. Okay. We're not just going to say, all right, when I say get, you say ready, get ready, get ready. All right, you guys got it. So anytime we do that, we're going to get silent and then just go into teaching. And then tomorrow you get ready, and they don't get silent. Oh, it doesn't work. That's not an effective strategy. A more effective strategy would be to do that consistently every day. And if anybody's not silent, we're doing it again. If anybody's talking, we're doing it again. If anybody's off task, we're doing it again. We are not just going to practice until we get it right. We're going to practice until we can't get it wrong. I told you the example of my assistant principal, my principal the first year that would raise his hand. The reason why that's so ingrained in my brain is because every meeting, every class, anytime he needed attention, he would stop and raise his hand. And we had a rough school. I'm not going to get into how rough that school was, but it was a rough school. And it would be pin drop silent when he stood there with his hand raised. Didn't happen on the first day, didn't happen on the second day, but by the end of the year, I don't know when it happened, maybe February, March, but by the end of the year and for the years to come, anytime he stood and raised his hand, it happened. We don't just practice till we get it right. We practice until we can't get it wrong. So after you use your attention grabbing signal, then you can start giving students directions. All right. I hope that this is helpful. I hope that you are somebody is saying to themselves, man, I can do a better job of using attention grabbing signals. I can do a better job, right? We can all do a better job. It's fine. I can do a better job at a lot of things, right? But want to make sure that we're saying to ourselves, okay, cool. This is something I can add to my toolbox, right? So now let's dive into the framework. I know that's what you've been waiting for. I know you're ready to say, let's do it. The framework, FRAME. Here we go. Here's a framework. And I want to set it up this way. I'm going to use a polarizing example, but I hope that the polarity of the example allows you to remember what I'm about to say. I hope that's all I'm going to say. I just hope that in using this example, you understand what I'm trying to say. After you use the attention grabbing signal, it is critical that you give clear directions next, because that is the most amount of attention that you're going to have. Can I say that again? Do you understand what I'm saying? After you use the attention grabbing signal correctly and every student is silent and focused and ready, you have a very small window of time in which you have to give information. I'll put it like this. This is the polarizing example I was talking about, right? September 11th, 2001, right? One of the most devastating days in Earth's history as terrorists attacked the New York Twin Towers. Now, statistics show that the week after those horrific events, church attendance skyrocketed. I'm not exaggerating. You can look it up. Church attendance skyrocketed the Sunday or the weekend after that event. And the reason why is because those that are religious or are not religious, or people were thinking the world is going to end, and people are thinking whatever their belief system was, they're like, I need to get my life right. I need to, get into a church. I need to shore up whatever's going to happen to me in the afterlife. Like, people started having these ideas. Church attendance skyrocketed. Okay. At the time of recording this, that was 23 years ago. If you look at church attendance now, it is not consistent with the way that it was a week after the 9/11 attacks, right? It is far less, church is far less attended than it was at that point. Why? Because time has passed, right? People have gone back to normal, gone back to just living life because the time passed. Why am I saying that? Because after you use your attention grabbing signal, that period of time is right after the signal is given is when you're going to have the most attention, is when you're going to have the most students ready, is when you're going to have the most students receptive. And as more time passes, you're going to lose attention, right? That's what happened to church attendance. Right after 9/11, boom, everybody was in church. They're focused, they're ready. They wanted to get their life right, right? As more time passed, people drift back down to normalcy. So what I'm saying is we can't squander the time. And I've seen so many instances in which teachers, they'll come into the classroom and they'll say something like this. I told you I was going to give you a non-example. Here's a non-example. They'll come into the classroom and they'll do something like, all right, so now, listen, everybody, we're going to start working in our workbooks. We're going to use the red book. We're going to be on page 267. When you finish page 267, go to page 268, but we're only going to do the odd. You know that the even answers are in the back. Remember, we talked about that. And it's not that I don't trust you, right? It's not that I don't think that you're going to do the right thing. It's just that I want to make sure that everybody is working effectively. So we're going to do page 268, and then skip over to page 319. You'll see that, this is what we started working. Some of you started working on this in advisory. So if you've already done 319, then you don't really have to do that. You guys can skip to 322 if you've already done 319 in advisory. And then listen. All right. So then, and then after you finish that page on 319, whatever you don't finish is going to be for homework. I know you guys are like, homework. Yes, homework happens, right? Some of you are saying, I have work to do after school. I have to go to work. I have to take care of the kids. Whatever. It's you. If you can't get it done right after school, maybe do it on the bus, maybe do it before school. But either way, that's going to be on page 319. When you finish with all that, then you're going to look at the blue book. Okay. So go ahead and make it happen, or go ahead and begin. Now, somebody was listening to that and you getting frustrated. You were like, all right, stop. Like you do, that's annoying. That's a lot. But you don't know how many classrooms that I've stepped in and that was literally, that was what I did just now was a shortened version of what I hear. And somebody sitting there thinking, if you're being honest and real with yourself, you're saying, yeah, that's me sometimes. So you use intention grabbing signal, you get their attention, then you start rambling because we don't have a consistent communication framework of how to communicate directions effectively, and you lose students. And now when you say, go get to work, then they start working and or they start doing something and you're like, you're not doing anything that I asked you to do. Okay. That's why it's so important to use a framework. And the framework is helps us to give clear directions. I know this is small on the screen, but I'm going to adjust it. I'm going to make it bigger to make sure that you see it. But I just want to make sure to give you all the framework right here, right now. In order to give clear directions, watch this. This is what you came for, right? This is the feature event, right? If we were at a comedy show, this would be the headliner. This is why you're here. This framework is what's gonna, when you master this, this is what's gonna help you get students to follow, to give clear directions so that students can follow directions. All right. Framework. The F stands for focused language, meaning that we're going to keep the instructions clear and straightforward, right? The R stands for routine steps, which means that we are going to break them into clear chunks that students can understand. The A is for assessing understanding. And when we assess understanding, what that means is we're going to make sure that students actually got the thing that we said. All right. Then the M is for multisensory aids. How can we reinforce the the words that we're using so that students can actually understand and retain or have a deeper understanding of the things that we are saying. And the E stands for encouraging feedback. How are we going to make sure that students stay on track along the way? So I'm going to walk you through it. Don't worry, that somebody might have been a little bit confused by that, but I'm going to walk you through each step of the framework so that you can do clear directions. And then that non-example that I gave, I'll show you how to do it the correct way. Okay. So the F again, the F stands for focused language. When you're using focused language, you want to make sure that you are giving clear directions and you are using the, here's how I like to say it. Let me put it like this. Whether it is a, I'm going to help somebody right here, right now. Whether it's a YouTube video, if you want to be an influencer on TikTok or whatever, whatever it is, pay attention to this. You want to speak as long as you need to, but as short as possible. As long as you need to get all the directions out to make sure that students get it, but as short as possible, meaning we're going to cut out the fluff. We're going to remove things. I'm not going to give another example like I just did, but how many times have you gotten on a YouTube video and then you start the video and like say the thumbnail says something, manage your classroom in 3 easy steps, right? Click on the video. It's like, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Evelyn, and today, so sorry I haven't been here for a while. My dog got sick, and you're like, no, just get to the 3 steps, right? The students are the same way. So if you use your attention grabbing signal, the next thing you have to use focused language. I'm going to say the words that I need to say. I'm going to give you all the information you need, but I'm also going to do it in the least amount of words possible. Okay, just get to the point. That's a great way to put it. Just get to the point. When you use simple and precise words that students understand, whether that's kindergarten, whether that's seniors in high school, use a vocabulary that students understand. Okay. So that's the F. So giving clear, focused language, and that's helping you give clear directions. Again, I'll give you an example of what that looks like all together at the end. Okay, so that's the F. The R is routine steps. So now, thinking I'm going to give clear language, you still want to chunk it into different steps. First, we'll do this. Then we'll do that. After, we'll do this. You're going to chunk it up into complete steps, and you don't actually need to give all the steps at once. Sometimes you can use focused language to state your step number 1 and let them do step 1. Bring back the attention, boom. And now we're going to step number 2 and let them do step 2. Okay. So what that does is it gives them, especially with the younger students, gives them a manageable chunk. All right. So I feel like an example needs to go here. I told you I'll put it all together at the end, but this might help somebody right now. So for example, instead of everything I said earlier with all that blabbering, right? You say, all right, the first thing that we're going to do is grab our blue books. You have 30 seconds to get your blue books and turn to page 268. Go. Instead of doing all blue book, 268, then 267, then if you finished it, instead of doing all that, let them know the first thing, get to the blue book, go to page 268, boom. Once they get there, now I'm gonna use my tentogramming signal again, and then I'll give them the next step. Okay, on page 268, you're only doing the evens, right? Something like that. Okay, so I'll give you the full example at the end. I'm getting into teach mode. I got excited, right? But we're using routine steps because we don't want to overwhelm the students. The A stands for assess understanding. Before you release them to do the thing, you have to make sure they understand what it is that they are about to do. So before you say, go do it, before you say, make it happen, before you release them to work, check and see if they actually got it. And that's not just saying, got it? That's literally asking somebody, okay, we're getting our blue books and we're turning to page 267. Jeremy, what page are we turning to? 267. Or class, what page are we turning to? 267. Okay. We're assessing to make sure that they heard it, that they got it, and we're reinforcing what it is that we're supposed to be doing. What book? What book? The blue book. What page? 267. How many seconds? 30 seconds. Whatever. Like you're assessing to make sure that they understood. Okay. So you can see what it says on the screen. You're going to use a targeted question to make sure that you are addressing what was being said. Okay. Then the M, the multisensory aids. You're going to use visual aids to assist. So that could be putting the steps on the board, right? That could be if it's a routine. Maybe it's not. We're taking out the book and turning to page 267. Maybe it's the way that we line up. There could be pictures on the wall of this is what it looks like to be in a line. Right? There can be anchor charts, just visual aids somewhere around the classroom that students are being able to see and understand. Okay, cool. This is what is expected of us. Right? I always like to say, a couple of weeks ago, my wife asked me to put together this shower caddy, and I'm not a big directions following kind of guy, especially when they're in other languages. But I opened the box and took all the pieces out, and then I just looked at the picture on the box. I said, okay, so here are the pieces. That's what it's supposed to end up like. Got you. And I did it. Right. Because sometimes we can just use an aid to assist us. So imagine if you're given directions in your class and you also have a visual aid of what it's supposed to look like. Instead of just saying we're going to stand in a silent straight line or stand in a straight line, but you have a picture of what it looks like for students to be standing in a straight line while you're describing it. That's just going to continue to reinforce and help students to understand and visually see what the expectation is and remember what that should be. Okay, so multisensory aids using different things, visuals, graphics, sounds, smells, like literally whatever it is that's going to help them to retain the information. Okay, and then the final step is the E, which stands for encouraging feedback. So after you give the directions, then we're going to give encouraging feedback to make sure that we are actually following up with students, giving them praise for doing the right thing, and we're redirecting them when they're doing things that are incorrect. So those that are on the right path, praising them like, awesome, you did a great job. That's exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Those that are not, redirecting them and following up and saying, remember, we're on page 267. Okay, 267. Okay. So here's an example of what that could look like using the framework, FRAME. Here's an example of what all I said earlier could look like. Okay. Sorry. I had to switch to the teacher mode. I was about to give it to you. I'm gonna settle down. Okay. All right. So when I say dream, you say big, dream big, dream big. Awesome. I love how we are seated, silent, and ready to go. All right. We're about to transition into math. The first thing that we're going to do is take out our blue books. We have 15 seconds to take out our blue books. What blue book? What book, everybody? Blue. Go. All right. I love how Jeremy's taking out his blue book. Amila is taking out her blue book. And so, Chin is seated with his blue book on his desk. Time. Awesome. Love how everybody's seated with the blue book on the desk. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do is turn to page 267. What page, everybody? 267. Awesome. Page 267. On page 267, we're only going to do the odd numbers on page 267. Okay. And when you are finished with the odd numbers, look on the board and it's going to tell you what to do next. All right. So right before we go, Jason, what numbers are we doing? Just the odd. You got it, man. Absolutely. Go ahead and get started. Okay. Now they're working on page 267. On the board, it says after you do page 267, then go to page 268, 319, whatever it is. It's a multisensory aid. It's now on the board, letting them know what to do next. So now I'm walking around the classroom. Awesome. Good job. I'm talking to students individually now, right? Okay, good. You're on page 267. Good job. You know where you're going next? Student looks up at the board. Awesome. Absolutely. Follow the board. It's going to tell you what to do next. Good job. I see you. You need help with it? Boom. I'm just following around to make sure I'm reinforcing the directions that we're given. Is this making sense? Are you seeing how using a framework like this, not just a framework like this, but this exact framework, using the frame method can help you to make sure that you are communicating c- effectively? Because when you effectively communicate, then you can transition the thoughts that are in your mind and to make sure it actually happens in somebody else's mind. I know you understand the directions. I know you understand the procedures. I know you get it, but can you effectively communicate what's going on in your mind so that you can give it to other students? Because when you give it to the students, that's how you get students to follow directions. Okay. The way you get students to follow directions is to master communication and to master this framework of communicating directions. And that is how we can make sure that students actually follow them. I promise you, you can do this. It's if a terrible teacher like me can figure it out, I'm sure that you can as well. Okay. I was a terrible teacher and I learned a lot of things like this along the way. And I was able to transition from that terrible teacher to a two-time teacher of the year. And that is just by being tried by fire and figuring some things out. This is one of the things that I learned. I was talking way too much, right? And that's why students weren't following directions. But understanding the framework has helped me to make sure that students actually get it and students do what is expected of them so that we can improve student achievement data. All right. I hope that was super helpful, but I also know that it's not all encompassing because now that you are giving students effective directions, now the question is, what happens if after the communication is clear, but they're still not following along, right? The communication happened, the majority of the class got it going on, but there's some students that still don't. All right, now we have to talk about what incentives and consequences look like in a whole behavior management system. But also, I wanted to make sure that this lesson was focused and I didn't want to ramble for hours. So, what we're going to do is, if that is something that is interesting to you, I actually have a completely free course called Classroom Management Made Simple. What you just witnessed was lesson 7 of that 14 lesson course, right? And I just want you to be able to step into this next year confidently because ultimately, I want you to be the teacher that you've always wanted to be and make the impact that you've always wanted to make. And I know that you can't do that if you cannot manage the classroom. So if you scan the QR code on the screen, if you're on your laptop, or if you're on your phone already, you can type in that code talk.ac/Daryl Williams Jr. It's going to ask you for a code and it's impact, IMPACT. You can see it there on the screen. I'm going to make it a little bigger for you. But if you go there, let me move my head out the way so that you can not see the QR code. So if you go there, you will see the click watch a free course and you will see the classroom management made simple course, which will allow you to learn how to manage your classroom effectively so that you can make the impact that you've always wanted to make and be the teacher that you've always wanted to be. I appreciate your time today and I hope that that was helpful in making sure that you figure out how to get students to follow directions. I'll see you soon.